Hello and welcome to Across the Balkans. I'm Hazem Sika. Good to have you with us. A political standoff looms over Kosovo after a new parliament failed to convene. The deadlock came after opposition parties blocked a key procedural vote. They claim the incumbent Prime Minister Albin Kurti and his party members acted unconstitutionally after they failed to resign before the certification of results. The session collapsed when lawmakers rejected the report verifying MPs' mandates, a procedural step required to seat the new assembly. Kurti condemned the move, calling it an institutional attack on the democratic process. So what's next for Kosovo? Adama Munu reports.
Të nderuara deputete e deputet, shërbimi I deputetëve vërteton se në salë janë 119 deputet, por për shkak të rrethonave të krijuara, me që raporti I komisionit në seancë nuk mori votat e mjaftueshme për, në këto rrethona detyrohemi ta ndërpresim seancën dhe me një letër ta njoftojmë presidentën se si do të veprohet në të ardhmen.
Albin Kurti may have won Kosovo's February parliamentary election, but forming a government would prove to be far more challenging. His Self-Determination or LVV party won 48 out of the 61 seats in the 120-seat parliament needed for a clear majority. This could only mean one thing: setting up a coalition with opposition parties to get him across the finish line before the inaugural session of the new parliament on Tuesday. The newly elected MPs from February were to take their oaths in parliament, with a speaker and deputy speaker also expected to be elected. But he resigned as Prime Minister on Tuesday shortly before he was to be sworn in as an MP. However, opposition MPs from the PDK, LDK, Serblist and AAK parties voted against the continuation of the process. Opposition members alleged that Kurti and his cabinet did not submit their resignation documents in time for Tuesday's meeting of the Interim Commission that oversees the appointments of lawmakers. The opposition effectively blocked the swearing-in even for their own members. Local media said with only 52 votes in favour, the report was not accepted and the session was adjourned. On the social media platform Facebook, Kurti described their move as an institutional attack from within.
Opposition MPs from PDK, LDK, Lista Serb and AAK today voted against the report of the Commission for verification of mandates. In a completely formal and technical vote based on the CEC documentation, they rebelled against the swearing-in of deputies and the constitution of the 9th legislature. This is an internal institutional attack against the Republic of Kosovo and democratic elections. It is known that they are against the government of the Republic, but that they are also against themselves.
The acting speaker, having cancelled the session, said Parliament would seek the President's guidance on the way forward. President Vjosa Osmani could turn to the other winning parties to determine whether they can form a cabinet. Failure to do so may see the country heading for another round of voting. Until then, the prolonged political uncertainty threatens to keep Kosovo on an uneven keel. Adama Munu, Across the Balkans.
Well, joining me now to talk more about this from Tirana is Agon Malici, a political analyst focusing on the Balkans. Thanks very much for being with us. So let me ask you, first of all, this does look like quite a mess, doesn't it? What's going to happen next? What are the possible scenarios here?
The parliament has to resume the session within 48 hours, so they'll probably try to have this procedural vote again. This is just a procedural vote to verify the MPs' mandates. This was the vote against by the opposition had two motivations. One was that they think that the PM and the government cabinet ministers who have been elected MPs will have to resign. So one scenario is that they do resign, which is unlikely. The second scenario is that the session continues, but then is not the parliament is sort of discontinued again. So this kind of drags on for a while. It's more of a show of force, also by the opposition, to illustrate that the PM does not have a majority, because the acting PM Kurti has all he needs is 61 votes to even pass this procedural vote. So the fact that they don't have those votes to just pass this procedural motion shows that they don't have the votes to elect the head of parliament and have a government. So what's expected to happen is, negotiations to continue for the government formation, and then this procedural step will sort of resolve by itself.
And what about the possibility of going back to the ballot box and just starting all over again?
It was seen as likely ever since the electoral result was clear, like a few weeks, or even months when after the election night. Because the result is in a way a deadlock, and even if someone, in this case primarily the acting PM Kurti, is able to form a government with 61 votes, that will be a government that will be most likely short-lived, an unstable one, relying only on 1 or 2 MPs, and which will have to surpass next year in March the hurdle of electing a new president. So in Kosovo's case, the parliament has to elect it. So they will require a broader consensus of 80 votes. So, even if a government is formed, it will likely be a short-lived one, an unstable one, and not one able, most importantly for Kosovo's international position, not one able to engage meaningfully in sort of the dialogue process with Serbia or take sort of big decisions because of the small majority it will have.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about some of that then. As you say, it leads to kind of unstable government, weak government, and that inhibits the Kosovo's ability to deal with its neighbors, like Serbia, for example. So what do we put that down to? Why is there so much division within the country on this? I mean, shouldn't they be working towards a common goal of strengthening the Republic of Kosovo?
Well, this is a result of deep polarization. It's in the Albanian sort of political spectrum in Kosovo. Prime Minister Kurti has sort of framed the political scene as, himself as the patriot, and framed all of the other, previously opposition parties as sort of, colluding with Serbia or being part of this sort of cabal of, business interests, and tied to Serbia. So this is a very highly polarized political scene in which these two camps do not trust each other at all. Whereas the political system of Kosovo requires consensus. It requires, at least one of the opposition parties to cooperate with Kurti in forming a government. And also, because of our system, it requires also non-majority communities, they have these guaranteed seats, to also have a say. So we are stuck in this position because of depolarization and a very different view of how the challenges with Serbia should be resolved. The outgoing PM is sort of more favors a more sort of sovereignist approach, whereas the other parties favor a more cooperative approach with Kosovo's strategic allies, primarily the US.
Let's broaden this out a little then, if we can, and talk about some of the economic challenges that are facing the government in Kosovo, whichever government eventually takes shape. How challenging are Kosovo's economic problems right now?
They are getting more and more challenging. So if you look at the polls, the cost of living is one of the key areas of concern, and it's one of the reasons why the outgoing government did not score as a result the kind of result that it wanted. The pace of sort of major infrastructure projects has been very slow. And in case of a sort of unstable government, that there will be more and more of this. So less investment, either public or private. So the problems will tend to be deeper. But the big issue economically, also for Kosovo, is this long-term perspective, sort of the ability of Kosovo and the region to resolve these sort of bilateral disputes, move ahead with EU accession, and sort of become a more credible investment destination, with the kind of political crisis and security crisis that keeps happening. This is unlikely to happen.
So this perception of a divided country, lacking a strong government, is what is inhibiting foreign investment into Kosovo right now?
Primarily, it's the issue of, investors perceive, whenever, Kosovo is a safe and stable country, on a day-to-day basis. But when you read headlines of these irregular tensions with Serbia, and this sort of lingering dispute and lack of full international recognition is indeed an inhibiting factor. Kosovo is still not a member of NATO, which is, although it has NATO within it, with a peacekeeping force, these kind of elements do really play a role in sort of perception of foreign investors on the long-term prospects of the country. So personally, I do think that this is an inhibiting factor, yes.
Let's talk about relations with Serbia then, which has historically been very tense, particularly with the government that is in place right now, led by Alexander Vučić. How does that factor into all of this?
Well, it's largely, the upcoming government, whoever forms the government, is largely expected to continue this EU-facilitated dialogue with Serbia. And there's a very sensitive issue as part of that dialogue, a commitment that Kosovo has undertaken, both previous governments and the outgoing one, to form this so-called Serbian majority municipalities association. It's one of the commitments that Kosovo has undertaken in exchange to sort of have some of its international recognition unlocked. This is a very highly sensitive issue domestically. And anyone who's coming into power now sort of is wary of the unpopularity of going ahead with these sort of steps, especially with a thin majority. And secondly, it's the issue of the new U.S. administration, which, as most of the world has seen, is sort of sometimes unpredictable and has a history of having tense relations with outgoing Prime Minister Kurti, particularly with regard to relations to Serbia, as Kosovo's Western partners would like to see faster progress in normalization of relations and sort of no sort of unilateral steps that increase tensions. And, despite Vučić being obviously the most problematic factor in the region, sometimes some Western partners, including the U.S., have seen outgoing Prime Minister Kurti as also having a share of being part of the problem in these tensions.
You mentioned the U.S. there. So there is, of course, the Trump factor in all of this, and the unpredictability that you mentioned earlier. And it's important, isn't it, because Kosovo sees the U.S. as a very significant ally, but President Trump has already played his cards with Europe and shown his differences with much of Europe. Where does this leave Kosovo now?
Well, first of all, it's really unclear what the Trump administration policy to the Balkans is. It doesn't seem like it's an area of focus for now. But there will be repercussions going ahead. So these trade sort of disputes with Europe, how the issue of Ukraine is resolved. At some point, the Trump administration will have to look into the Balkans. For now, it's mostly been continuity in terms of the messaging, the lines. But yeah, Kosovo has sort of a high degree of dependence on the U.S., especially because it faces the European Union, in which 5 members of the EU did not recognize Kosovo, sort of a EU that treats Kosovo a bit more asymmetrically and has a neutral stance towards Kosovo's independence. It usually relies on U.S. to support to counterbalance that. So the relationship with the U.S. is a major issue going forward, and it also is one of the major issues determining the creation of the government, because the previous opposition parties are reluctant to cooperate with outgoing Prime Minister Kurti because they perceive him to be as unacceptable to the U.S. administration.
And if we talk about Kurti himself a little bit for a moment, the now former Prime Minister, he's taken a lot of criticism for his own leadership style. I mean, you wrote in a commentary that he was erratic, confrontational, and an unreliable partner for the EU. What are some of the examples of that?
This is, it's not necessarily sort of the positions he has taken or sort of, the maximalist positions for Kosovo. It's more in the form of not sticking to what he says in terms of actions which led to sort of crisis which NATO had then had to clean up. For example, 2 years ago, there was this installation of the new mayors in the north, which the Western partners supported Kosovo in sort of having elections, which Serbia boycotted. And Kurti sort of told his Western partners that Kosovo would not sort of take unilateral steps, and then he did. So it was more a matter of managing relations and sidestepping and not coordinating with security partners in a context of the North, where NATO is primarily sort of has a major responsibility for security, and in the context of a broader war against Russia. So this is why this has angered a lot of Western security partners. This fact that the PM Kurti was sort of took steps that were uncoordinated and that had major implications for NATO and broader European security, the costs of which NATO had to bear. So in that sense, that's the main reason of frustration with his actions.
And how does all of this affect the European Union's efforts in the region and this long-held ambition to eventually eventually bring all of the Balkan nations into the bloc?
Well, it's very simple. The lack of normal relations between Kosovo and Serbia is a major obstacle that prevents both countries from moving any step forward. Kosovo cannot become even get the candidate status because it's not recognized by 5 EU member states. Serbia's EU accession path has effectively halted. They have not opened any negotiating chapters in a very, very long time. Part of it has to do with its poor situation in terms of rule of law, but part of it is also related to the lack of normalization with progress in normalizing relations with Kosovo. So this relation is sort of damaging both countries, but it also has a negative impact beyond Kosovo, in Bosnia, in North Macedonia. It has regional implications, which is why the only 2 countries that are sort of moving forward a bit more swiftly towards EU accession are Albania and Montenegro, because they do not have, they do not suffer much from these implications. So the Kosovo-Serbia dispute is one of the major obstacles in having the Balkans move forward.
And with all of that in mind, do you fear that Kosovo as a nation will be left behind?
Well, there are definitely opportunity costs from from this dialogue with Serbia prolonging endlessly. There's a lot of demographic dividend being lost, outward migration. There's a lot of investment lost in the medium to long term. So absolutely, there are huge costs of the current stalemate. And they might at some point they might also turn into security risks for Europe, which is why both the EU and NATO have to prioritize the resolution of the Kosovo-Serbia dispute.
All right, should be interesting to see where all of this does play out. Agon Malici, thanks very much for your analysis.
Thank you for having me.